Right, that takes us to item, now are you ready for 30? Okay, so item 30, so Mr. Fink, our librarian, county librarian, is it? Yep, okay. Good morning.
Good morning, and I really want to thank you for giving me time today. You have a very busy and important schedule. I feel kind of bad taking this 10 minutes, so think of it as a break, perhaps, you know. Well, I'm here today just to update the activities over the last year of the Lest We Forget project, which is Yolo County and World War I. So under the aegis of the Yolo County Archives Library, and with over 1,000 volunteer hours, we've been able to look at over 10,000 individual records for the county, just Yolo. And from that, we're extracting a lot of information. For instance, we know every man that was living here from the age of 18 through 45 during the war years, and we have their personal information, where they were working, married, etc. Of course, we've focused on our service people, and we now have the names of over 900 people that did enter the armed forces during the 19 months of the war. In addition, we now know the civil and community leaders that worked for the county on the war effort, and this particular war was driven and run on the county level rather than the federal level. Also, we've taken this ongoing research and taken it out to our communities throughout the county. We've had 25 events so far. We've got another 20 scheduled between now and November. There are schedules outside. And while we do that outreach, we are trying to make it a two-way conversation so that we can get the oral histories into the report we will be doing at the end of this very long, it's going to be a 10-year project, by the way, for the research. So we also, as part of the outreach, are trying to preserve our documents from that era, which are going away very quickly. And so we have had 16 donations that range from a World War I poster through to 38 letters that were written to one of our soldiers in France from his family and friends from the Samora area. So with that, I'm just going to show you a few slides so you can experience in 5 minutes what usually takes 2 hours, just the key points of what we have found out. So on April 6, 1917, the United States, and therefore Yolo County, entered World War I. As I said, the federal government decided that it would be run as much as possible at the county level. So 2/3 of the funding for this war was raised at the county level. Yolo County itself raised $1.5 million in 6 weeks, and in today's buying power, that would be about $25 million. The Board of Supervisors, this entity, led the way by buying $130,000 worth of bonds from their surplus fund. So we were a very rich county, and it was because of our agriculture. We had a very good soil and temperate climate, but we also had the University of California's Farm School in Davis, and we had a very strong Farm Bureau and farm advisory system. In fact, Yolo was on the cutting edge of agriculture at that time. And so even Herbert Hoover, who was the United States Food Administrator, would use Yolo County as the example for other counties throughout the states to follow. So we were really on pushing the boundaries every time we were asked to do something. It was a war where everybody was expected to do their bit. Children were expected to save their pennies so they could buy a 25-cent thrift stamp. That was their funding effort. They also collected things like linen, leather, newspapers, so they could be recycled for the war. And of course, they did a lot of plays, parades, and kind of patriotic things to encourage people to donate. The women of the county were very important. Our Red Cross chapter, again, was one of the ones held up as an example. We had over 600 women every week knit jumpers, sew garments for the boys overseas, but mostly in the brand new courthouse, in the surgical room, they actually made the bandages and dressings that were sent to France and used by the doctors and nurses at the front. They were all made at the county level. The county was also responsible for the draft. We had 1,625 boys register on June 5th, 1917, between the age of 21 and 30. And from that pool, the county examined, selected, and actually inducted into the army right here on the courthouse steps the men that had to represent Yolo. We also had the privilege and honor of having almost 500 men volunteer. And they joined all branches of the Army, and the Navy recruited very heavily here. We had Ailey boys join up very quickly, and that was because Mare Island was the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet. And of course, our own Woodland Company F, part of the National Guard, they got sent down, the 71 of them got sent down to Camp Kearney as part of the 40th Division. The Sunshine Division. So during this first year, what I found out is very few soldiers, period, got over to France. In December, there were only 64,000 Americans in France. And so there wasn't a lot of fighting going on with the American troops. But some of our Yolo boys had already entered into the fighting armies, such as the French, the German, the British, Canadian, and the Italian. And our first death was Amadi Okamasi. He was an immigrant to America. He had taken his declaration of intent to become a citizen, married, had a child, and he worked for Martelli's vegetable market on Main Street. But in 1916, Italy called him to join his home regiment, and he went over and he died in 1917 at the Battle of Trieste. Sorry, I skipped. Our next death was the grandson of Basil Campbell, who was an African-American slave that came to Yolo with the Stevens family. And Mr. Campbell earned his freedom and became quite a large landowner, only to see his grandson in October of 1917 commit suicide. He had been in the service for over 12 years, and nobody's quite sure why he did that. But suicide was a part of World War I. We follow that story too. Winters lost their first boy, Vernon Maxwell, on Christmas Day, 1917. He was down in Camp Kearney. He got measles, which became pneumonia. He actually died in one of those tents. That was the camp hospital at the time. Charles Hunt, who was from Woodland, also died from pneumonia. He had joined the Navy and he was sent down to the San Diego area. His body was returned to Woodland for burial, and his pallbearers were all his schoolmates. And just an aside, Raymond Vacker was one of those pallbearers, and he would be our last boy to die in the war, also from pneumonia. So I said there weren't very many boys over in France, but out of the 64,000, there were a few Yolians. And so our first death overseas on the battlefront, although he died again from pneumonia, was Otto Schoeman, who was a dairyman from Beatrice, Yolo. So obviously, there was a need for care of these soldiers, both at the training camps where most of them were and overseas. And so we did have a response. Our nurses responded very well. The sanitarium here, Woodland, had many sign up. And if you were going to go overseas, you had to join the Army Nursing Corps, and that was the uniform there on the right. So at the end of my program, I always take a minute. And as this board in 2016 did, you asked the residents to take some time during this war period to commemorate our people that served and also those that we lost. We always take a minute at the end of the program to honor those. And in this particular year, we would just be honoring Otto, Charles, Basil, Vernon, and Amandio, the 5 from Yolo that died. So thank you for your time, and I just want to remind you the 100th anniversary of the end of the war is at 11/11/11, November 11th, 11 a.m., and if you can, please attend the old courthouse. American Post 77 will hold their annual, but it will be a commemorative occasion for World War I. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in the course of your efforts to bring materials together, have you looked at the influenza epidemic?
Well, you know, the influenza epidemic, it started, yes, March 8th. We know where it started, Camp Funston, which was one of the huge training camps, and those boys took it over into Europe. And so it comes back at the end of the war, so late September, early November is when you see most of the deaths here.
1918 is when.
Yes,
yeah,
so 1918, the end of 1918 and the beginning of 1919. And I've divided the war into 4, so actually that will be that part of it will be in my last talk, which will cover the last few months. It's research as we go. I haven't quite got to that yet.
Thanks.
So, no.
But you'll talk about Yolo County's experience and our
Oh,
people's
absolutely.
experience
On the home front.
with influenza. Will you give a focus to that?
Yes.
Okay.
On the home front, how it impacted here,
Yeah.
and how it impacted overseas.
Great.
Because it really influenced the war.
Stay tuned. Coming attractions.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.